Today's an exciting day for the E-Moto crowd. Another new bike just launched. Check this out. All right, so officially announced is the brand new Talaria Sting MX5 PRO. I think we know this has been coming for a while. All the bikes are starting to compete against each other, like trying to one-up each other on specs. So let's do a quick reaction video talking about what we wanted out of the bike and then go through the specs of what was just announced.
Sounds good. We all know that the E-Ride Pro SS sales have been fantastic this year. They've kind of taken over the market, and we knew that Talaria would have to compete, and this is their answer to that bike. So Nate, do you remember the very first time that we rode a Talaria?
I remember it very well because I absolutely hated that bike. I swear that bike tried to kill me multiple times on the trail. It felt like riding a hot rod. That bike was like, the rear end was way up high. I thought I was gonna fall off of the front end a couple of times because that terrible RST fork just would blow through all of its travel. The power was just on or off. It was just super punchy. I wanted to get off of that bike and go straight back to my Suron.
Now, for context, this was 2021. Yeah. It may or may not have been a pre-production unit. We were a little fuzzy on that back at that time, but it was a Gen 1. It was not the MX3. It was not the MX4. They've come a long way since that. So let's go through a brief history of Talaria. So everybody's familiar with there's the MX3 and there's the MX4. The MX3 had a little bit of a history where it started with some pretty terrible, we call it stink bug geometry, where the front end's too low, the rear end's too high. Somewhere along the way, they actually lowered the rear end to try to fix that. Still wasn't perfect, but better. Had 6 kilowatts of power.
Yeah, then they came out with the MX4, which was a better bike. They increased the power up to 8 kilowatts. Felt like they were really going for the wheelie crowd there because the throttle still comes on really hard. So when you're riding it on a trail, it's not exactly the smoothest bike because it still has a little bit of off-on. They put better suspension on it. So they came out with a Talaria factory fork. Some bikes launched with a fast ace fork. And they did make the bike better, but it still left everyone wanting just a little bit more.
Yeah, I will say out of sort of last year's generation or into early this year, I'd say the MX4 did have the best suspension of the crop.
It did. So we tune a lot of suspension, and the Talaria factory fork, when it's tuned, is a great fork. Probably even one step up from our tuned fast ace fork. So again, they really made big strides on that bike, but if I'm going through a couple of things that I wish they would fix, mine still goes back to geometry. I still feel like the front end's a little bit too low. We took that so far that we actually created a drop crown to raise the front end 1 inch higher if you have the fast ace version of that fork, which significantly made it better. Most of the bikes that we touch, like our personal Talaria, we put 16-19 wheels on it to try and just bring the front end up as much as we could. I always wanted to see them do just a little bit more power because although 8 kilowatts is really good, as soon as the E-Ride Pro came out, oh my gosh, how much faster was that bike? Like, huge difference taking it from 8 kilowatts in an MX4 up to 12 kilowatts. And in supporting the Talaria crowd, we do really well with the Torque TC500 or the EBMX X9000 because that battery can handle a little over 11 kilowatts non-bypassed. You literally put on a controller, you've got more power. And then lastly, one thing we really struggle with when racing and putting down too much power, modifying these bikes, the chain falls off all the time. That's one thing that happens at a lot of our races. And so I've always wanted to see them fix that one thing so that in a race there's not a mechanical, there's not the top leading person who's really fast fall out of the race because their chain fell off. That's what ended up costing $20,000 worth of surgery of a chain dropping. So it's just a common problem that we always want to see fixed.
So to recap that, if you were the product manager running this project at Talaria, your top 3 things that you would fix would be more power and smoother more power, because it does hit kind of hard. So we want a smoother power band. Better geometry, so getting rid of that stink bug and making it more of a flat platform. And then thirdly, some sort of chain guide so that the chain doesn't drop as often.
Yeah, just because there's flex in all of these bikes, that is one thing that would just be nice. If we could add one, I'd love to have it.
For me, it's a little more nitpicky and little things, and it's little things that has to come from the OEM because it's harder for us in the aftermarket to fix. So I really want the OEM to fix these things. So first thing is brakes. These are all mountain bike brake-based bikes, and there's a lot of limitations of what you can do with the braking systems. We sell TRP brakes, and they're fantastic. They're probably the best in the market. But I'd like to see much better brakes from the OEM, so that'd probably be my number 1. Number 2, the one thing that drives me nuts when I ride a Talaria is the rattling.
That's terrible.
It's so bad. I literally think the bike is broken when I ride it, and the rattling comes from 2 places. It comes from the battery. The battery is just not secured inside that cage, and it makes a lot of noise. And then in the rear linkage of the suspension, it tops out, which means it's hitting metal on metal when it rebounds, and just has a weird feel to it. So I guess I'll call that rattling and overall kind of clunkiness. So I'm hoping they fix that because that was super annoying for that bike. And then the last thing is having some type of regen lever. It's really nice. We ride in the mountains a lot, and to save the brakes and not overheat them, it's really nice to have some way to activate regen on a bike. And those are the types of things that the OEM really needs to do because it's a lot harder for us to do that in the aftermarket.
If nothing else, it shows that the manufacturers are watching what's happening in the aftermarket and they're actually providing that out of the box. We saw it with, as an example, the E-Ride Pro comes with a light switch and a couple other things that are just kind of nice to haves.
So let's get into the specs that have been released on the MX5 Pro. All right, so let's start out. What everybody wants to know is how much power does this thing put out? So the E-Ride Pro is what, 12 kilowatts?
Yep.
This is claiming 13.4 kilowatts. So they went just a tad above the E-Ride Pro and the new power output. Now, it is a little funny here. They have an Eco, a Sport, and a new Hyper mode. I don't know what that means. We're gonna have to wait till we get our hands on it.
I hope it's real and not another gimmick.
Yeah.
Second up is range. Everyone wants to know, can I ride further than before? So this is the same battery that's spec'd in an E-Ride Pro SS. It's a 72 volt, 40 amp hour battery. That's 2,880 watt hours. So a little bit further range, way more power out of the stock battery.
And to handle that power, they claim some gearbox updates. So you probably already know that the Talaria does not use a belt drive like most of the other bikes. It's a gear-driven system. They claim some updates there and low noise and things like that. Hard to say exactly what that means, but I would assume it's a stronger, more reliable gearbox.
Yeah, we're going to try and fight through some of the marketing here because it makes sense that a manufacturer would talk up things that they want to put in the highlights or the key features, but they didn't really change from last year. One thing that has increased, though, with that additional power, you've got to slow yourself back down. So the brakes are still 220 millimeters, but they are now 3 mil thick.
And they say they have a bigger caliper on it. So that's going back to one of my asks is it appears they have a stronger, better brake system that probably dissipates heat better, which is awesome.
One thing that I do like in the photos, you can see that it has a dial where you can adjust the reach. So that's really nice for all of you that have stripped out that tiny little bolt and basically rendered your brakes useless. It also is interesting that the front brake line was that really strong looking, stiffer brake line, kind of like you would see on a motorcycle.
Yeah, so Talaria must have watched our video
Yeah.
about the wrong cable routing.
Yep.
They were routing the cable on the outside. It was kinking really bad. It was really, really bad actually from an OEM to do that. So it looks like they finally fixed that. And it looks like a legit moto brake hose up there, which is and a true guide. So huge props for them to fixing that the right way.
So another thing that jumped out is that new front fork. The suspension looks really good on this bike. It looks like it's manufactured from Fastace, but what's interesting is it's 20 millimeters more travel than all the prior forks. So longer travel, higher front end, 220 millimeters.
So that hopefully will help the geometry a little bit and get that front end up higher where it needs to be. I'll be interesting to see if our new 1-inch drop crown fits that fork.
Hopefully it does.
Now, some other things I noticed on that fork, which were really cool, is a lot of adjustability. So on both sides of the top caps, you have preload, so you can dial in additional spring preload. So a heavier rider or a big jumpy rider can dial in more preload. And there's compression on one side and rebound on the other side. So a lot of adjustability happening in that fork. So really excited to try that out.
So it retains the egg rider looking display. They claim that it's color now, so that's a little bit interesting. The same 4 modes of regen braking, but like your wish list, there is a thumb throttle for regen braking whenever you're riding, which if you haven't used this before, it may sound a little bit gimmicky. It has become popular from the aftermarket controller perspective. I know that I use it more than I ever thought I would riding, especially if we're coming down a long mountain. Your hands start to get a little bit tired. Your brakes aren't quite strong enough. You just have a thumb throttle there to slow yourself down.
It helps you preventing overheating the mountain bike-based brake systems, having that thumb braking. So that's a really cool addition. Happy to see that. The only other bike we've seen that on in this class is the Ventus One has that, right?
It does, yeah, it comes like that out of the box, which is nice to see the manufacturers matching what we see in the aftermarket. One other thing that looks interesting, straight pull spokes, a little bit interesting. That means they've redesigned the hubs so that they're claiming that the wheels are going to be stronger with reinforced spokes. So maybe a little bit thicker than before. It does have a headlight switch, so that's kind of nice. You can use that whenever you want. Don't have to add one from the aftermarket. So with all these new additions, bigger battery, maybe upgraded components, foot pegs, stronger wheels, that actually comes with a bit of a weight penalty. This bike is coming at a claimed 159 pounds.
So that's about 20 pounds more than a E-Ride Pro, if I remember
Close
correctly.
to it, yeah. Okay, so let's net this out. Brand new bike, more power, bigger battery, better brakes, better suspension. It's kind of a win-win. So the real question becomes, if you're an MX4 owner, you're debating on unloading your bike that you've probably already put time and money into versus the MX5. So we have an MX5 on the way. The one thing that I want to compare is how does our MX4 stack up? Because we know the suspension's good. We've tuned it. We've fixed the geometry. We have put better wheels and tires on it. We have upgraded the brakes. There's a lot of things that we put into that bike. So let's do a head-to-head.
Yeah, that sounds like a great review video. So when we get our MX5, we'll go through the whole thing and see what some of this marketing hype is that it's hard to translate from paper. And then let's put it up against our MX4 that's been upgraded, because there's a lot of you have MX4s out there and you'd probably like to see, is it worth buying the MX5 or should I just put a little bit of money into my MX4?
So this will be a good comparison. See what Talaria did out of the box, knowing that upgrades will come for it eventually, but probably going to be a great bike for what we expect to be, probably just shy of $5,000. And I think the good thing for customers is seeing that manufacturers are trying to one-up each other.
Yep, competition is always great for the market. Thrilled to see this bike launch. So I think that's a great idea to take an MX4 that's been moderately upgraded and put it against the new MX5 Pro. But I think what a lot of people out there are thinking is, what about the E-Ride Pro SS? It dominated sales in 2024. And a lot of people own them. So we definitely need to put the E-Ride Pro SS up against the MX5 Pro. That's going to be an awesome shootout.
So stay tuned for our next video as we take these, do a shootout, and answer all of your questions.